Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be reviewing two figures of speech that deal with comparisons. And those figures of speech are similes and metaphors. So let's see what these are about, or at least let's delve a little deeper into these two figures of speech. Now, we know that they both involve comparisons, right? But what type of comparisons are what additional details do we need to include, right? And as you see on screen, we have an orange and we have an apple and we have an orange. And this is very fitting because they're basically balancing themselves, right? One is not heavier than the other, so they're both on an equal surface. This is very fitting because we're talking about comparisons. All right. And when you compare two things, you're pointing out the similarities. So this is very, very appropriate given what we're going to discuss today. Now let's begin with a simile. Now, a simile compares two different entities with the use of like or as. So right then and there, we know that similes involve two things: comparisons between two different entities, and they involve the use of like or as. Now, when I say entities, I'm referring to people or things. That's why I use entities rather than things, because things would exclude persons. So entities would be it would encompass everyone and everything, right? So that's why entities would be a word that would be more appropriate. So those are the two requirements: a comparison between two different entities, and the use of the words like or as, the use of like or as, right? So what do similes do? Now, if we want to know the purpose of a simile, we could simply analyze the purpose of a comparison, because that's what a simile does. It is a comparison. So why do we draw comparisons? Well, we draw comparisons because we want to illustrate the similarities between two persons or things. That's why we draw comparisons. But what this comparison does is that when we identify the similarities between two people or things, it helps us to create an image of what is being described. But this, in the case of, yes, this could work. This can also work for persons. So similes would be used for explanation and clarification purposes, just like a comparison. So when we use similes, we want to identify the similarities between two persons or things and create an image of what is being described, right? So if I don't know what X is like, I can compare it to Y so that people can understand what X is. You see what I mean? And of course, if we're talking about similes, then we have to use like or as. So if I say X is like Y, or X is as whatever as Y, then my intention is for you to understand what X is by comparing it to Y, right? So let's look at two examples. And because similes involve the use of the word like, because they involve the use of like or as, they're easy to identify. And on that note, just because a sentence has like or as does not mean that it is a simile, or it is an example of a simile. Not really. There are two things that are necessary for it to be a simile. There must be a comparison between two different things or entities. And right, secondly, the use of like or as. So if there is no comparison, then it is not a simile. So just bear that in mind. Just because you see like or as does not necessarily mean that the sentence is a simile. Okay? Remember, comparison between two different things are, I keep saying things, but two different entities and the use of like or as. No, examples. She swam like a fish. So we identify the two entities, she, which would be a female, and a fish, that would be, right, the second entity. And we are comparing them on how they swam. Now, when we say this, she swam like a fish, we are saying, okay, we are trying to paint a picture of how she swam. So by saying she swam like a fish, we are saying that she can swim very well. By comparing her swimming ability to that of a fish, we're in essence saying that she can swim very well. So if we wanted to describe how she swims, or we wanted to describe her swimming ability, we can just say she swam like a fish or she swims like a fish. And that would allow people to understand that she can swim very well because a fish, the ocean is its home. So by comparing her by comparing her swimming ability to that of a fish, we are saying that she can swim very well, right? So you see how useful a simile can be, right? And Mar is as brave as a lion. Once again, we have two entities, Mar and lion, and they're being compared on their courage, right? So when we say Mar is as brave as a lion, we are saying that, and you know, a lion is a beast, right? A very ferocious animal. So if we're saying Mar is as brave as the lion, then we are giving persons an idea of how brave Mar is, right? That he's basically fearless. So we see how useful similes can be in descriptions when it comes to describing either persons or things, right? So just remember that when it comes to similes. Now, metaphor. Now, a metaphor is very similar to a simile, right? In fact, the only difference is that it does not use the words like or as, the word like or as. So a metaphor compares two different entities without the use of like or as. They can be direct or implied, right? And we're going to see what both of those mean. Because basically the same as a simile, with the only difference being that metaphors do not include like or as. They aim to highlight similarities between two persons or things, and create an image of what is being described. So they have the same purpose as a simile, essentially, because they involve comparisons, right? But let me explain what is the difference between a direct and an indirect metaphor, or an implied metaphor rather. So if a metaphor is direct, one entity will be said to be another. So you can look at that as a formula for a direct metaphor. Entity X is entity Y. One thing will be said to be another. Time is money. Now you may look at that and be like, So if I say that time is money, then that means that time and money have to have something in common. Otherwise, they can't be compared. All right? So time is money. What do time and money have in common? Well, we can say that both are valuable resources and which need to be spent, which means that they need to be spent wisely. Okay? So those are two entities that have something in common, right? Now, the common factor between these two entities will be something that you as the reader or you as the listener will have to decide on, right? It's not going to be right there. The similarity is not going to be in your face like with a simile where it says, okay, Mar is as brave as a lion. So how would the two entities be similar? Well, they're both brave. So they're going to tell you exactly what what grounds are they similar. But with metaphors, that does not happen. When it's direct, it's just going to say that entity one is entity two, but they have to have something in common. Otherwise, they couldn't be compared, right? So like I said, time is money. They're two valuable resources that require um that ought to be spent wisely, essentially, right? Laughter is the best medicine. So we have two entities, laughter and medicine. Now, laughter is entity one, medicine will be entity two. And we're saying is the best medicine. So what do they have in common? Now, what does medicine do? Well, it's supposed to heal. So we're saying that laughter has a therapeutic effect on people. Laughter has the ability to heal persons, just like a medicine does, just like medicine. So by saying laughter is the best medicine, we're saying that laughter has therapeutic effect or has a therapeutic effect on persons. So that in that way they are similar. So you see how direct metaphors work. Entity one will be said to be entity two. And you would realize that they both would have something in common. It's not going to be explicitly stated, but you will know that these two are similar. Otherwise, there will be no way that they can be said, that one thing can be said to be another. Another example, if I say Mar is a sheep, in order for me to say that, they have to have something in common. Okay, so let's look at a sheep. What qualities do the what could or what grounds can they be similar? Okay, so a sheep, we know sheep follow. So I could say if I say that Mark is a sheep, then I'm saying that Mark follows the crowd. He doesn't have an independent mind. So right. So I'm using that as explanation or clarification. Okay. Yes. And if I wanted to change these to to similes, I would say time is like money. That would be an example of a simile. If I wanted to, of course, change these metaphors into similes, time is like money, or time is as precious as money. Laughter is the best medicine. I could say laughter is like the best medicine, or I could say laughter is as effective as, oh yeah, as the best medicine. Yeah, you could say that. Right. Or rather, I could say laughter is as effective as medicine. Instead of saying best, laughter is as effective as medicine, or laughter is like medicine. Yeah, that would be a better way to say. Mhm. So laughter is like medicine, or laughter is as effective as medicine. Right. So that's if I want to change these into similes, right? No, implied metaphors. So if a metaphor is implied, one entity will be compared to another and the second entity will not be mentioned. Sometimes the inverse can occur, right? In other words, one entity is not mentioned, right? So when we have implied metaphors, we are going to have, yes, two entities being different entities being compared. But the thing is, one will not be mentioned. So this is why it's called implied. It's not going to be explicitly mentioned, but you will have some indication in the sentence that another entity is being used in the comparison or is being mentioned. But it would be implied. It would not be direct. For example, the sergeant barked orders at the troops. So in this example, we see the word, look at the word barked, and what comes to mind? Dogs. Dogs bark to communicate. So when we say that the sergeant barked orders, we're comparing the sergeant to a dog, but we're not doing it directly because we didn't say, okay, the sergeant, we didn't say the sergeant is like a dog, right? So we use an indirect way of comparing him to a dog. Right. Right. What does bark mean? So bark is going to be used when we are shouting, right? So if I say the sergeant barked orders, then that means that he basically was shouting, like rough, 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 right? He was shouting at the troops. And by saying he barked, we're comparing him to dogs, right? And that's just we're comparing him to a dog. We're comparing the sergeant to a dog based on his reaction, right? And John erupted when he saw the results. So we look at the word erupted. What do you know that? What other entity you know that erupts? Volcanoes, exactly. So this is an indirect comparison between John and a volcano, right? So when we say erupt, what does erupt mean? When a volcano erupts, there's an explosion, right? So that means that there's a sudden burst of energy, and that is what can be said about John. So that means when John erupted, that means that if John erupted when he saw the results, that means that there was a sudden burst of energy. He erupted. It was sudden. So it's being compared, his reaction is being compared to a volcanic eruption. So as you see, it does not explicitly state that a volcanic reaction, I keep saying water, I keep mixing up that word, but yes, it does not explicitly mention a volcanic eruption or a volcano, but it indirectly does it by using the word erupted. Okay? Same thing with the first example. The sergeant barked. It does not directly mention a dog, but it indirectly does by using the word barked. So this is how implied metaphors work, right? So if you look at a sentence and you see that a comparison is being drawn in a subtle or indirect way with the use of a word or a phrase, then that would be an example of an implied metaphor, right? So these are different these are different from direct metaphors because direct metaphors will mention the two entities saying that one is another, but this one is only going to mention one of the entities, right? And the other entity is going to be hinted at, right? With the use of a word or the use of phrases. All right. All right, so this brings us to the end of this lesson on similes and metaphors. I hope that you found it useful. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.